Hello YouTube, I'm Arend Peter, long time no see. Today we're going to make a tutorial on how to make a basic platformer in GameMaker. So on the screen now you will see the final product, just a guy that jumps around. Okay, so here is our starting point. I have loaded some sprites into the project to make it look pretty. I have some tile sets with those sprites, and I have a few rooms which are decorated with those tile sets. The only room we're actually going to be working on is this arm platformer room, and you can see it's decorated with a bunch of tiles, but there are no objects in this room, as you can see in the layers over here. Just as an FYI, I didn't make any of this art. I got it all from opengameart.org. And there are links in the description to the specific art assets as well as the creators who made them. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to need two objects for this platformer. We're going to need a object for the player and an object for the solid. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the objects folder, go to create and select object. And then just to give you some more options, if you wanted to, you can go click on the objects folder, hit Alt-O. That's another way you can make objects. Then for as far as naming them, I'm going to go ahead and name this first one player. And again, just to give you options, another way to do renaming is to click on the object, as we're going to do with object 2. Hit F2, and we're going to name that one solid. Okay. So we're going to start with solid because that's a much simpler object. For the sprite, we're going to select solid, that's one I made myself. It's just filled in with black and it's semi-transparent, which will be nice later, but it doesn't really matter how it looks. The only thing you need to do with this object is to check this solid box, and I'll be explaining later why checking that option is important. Okay, up to the player. We're going to be going to sprites and select S-Player. This was retrieved from OpenGameArt. I'm going to jump into the step event and let's start typing some code. I'm going to be implementing all of this with code, but it should hopefully be pretty simple. I'm going to explain everything. So I'm going to go ahead and make two code blocks here. I have one code block for horizontal movement and one code block for vertical movement. Code blocks is a new thing in 2.3, and it's nice for letting you fold and unfold your code. Alright, so I'm going to type out the code for moving right, then explain afterwards. Okay, this should be pretty straightforward. Keyboard check is a function which returns true or false depending on whether that key is pressed. So if we are holding down right, we will execute this command, which adds 4 to our x value. And remember, positive means moving to the right, negative means moving to the left. So by adding 4 to our x value, we are shifting our position to the right. Perfect. Okay, and then we're going to write a very similar line for moving left. Cool. That looks good. So now we should have basic left and right movement, but I'm going to need to add everything to the room. And I'm going to go ahead and make a layer for my instances. And then on that layer, I can hold down Alt and I can start painting these guys on. Looks like I also need to change my grid size. So my art is all tiny pixel art. So needs a grid size of 16. If you're using small pixel art sprites and it doesn't look the way you want it to on the screen, like it's too small on the screen, I'm planning on making a tutorial talking about how to fix that. So if you're having a problem with that, let me know and I'll make a tutorial. So we have the solids, we have the player. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Alright, here's our game window, and I can move left and right, but the one thing that's immediately jarring is that, one of the many things that are immediately jarring is that the sprite is not facing the way I'm moving. So if you have an art like mine where it faces in one direction, you're probably going to want it to change the way it's facing. So here's how you do that. We're going to be changing the X scale of the art asset to make it look like it's facing to the left. So as a demonstration in the room editor, the X scale can be seen right here. If I make it bigger, it'll become wider like that. If I make it smaller, it'll become shrunken like that. And then if I make it below 0, you can see it'll face the other way. So normally it's at 1, x scale equals 1, but we want it to be equal to x scale equals -1 if we are moving to the left. So back to the code. The way we do that is very simple. Just if we're moving right, image x scale equals 1. If we're moving left, image x scale equals -1. Alright, let's try that. Alright, we're facing the correct direction, but we see an issue here where it's jumping quite a bit. And there's a reason for that. Let me jump into why that's happening. If we go into the sprite, we actually need to update the origin. So I'm going to hit Control T, right, type S player. And then over here, this origin needs to be updated. Origin directly represents which point corresponds to your XY value. So when we say x equals 4 or something, we're saying that this point needs to be 4 and the rest of it needs to be to the right of that. But another thing the origin is in charge of is it indicates which point on the sprite will stay consistent when you're performing stretching and rotation operations. If I'm stretching the player, if I'm stretching it, it'll be stretching away from that point, and then if I shrink it, it'll shrink down to that point. So if we think about the mirroring operation, we actually want it to mirror around the center of the player, and particularly the feet. So that way when we stretch up, it'll stretch away from the feet. If we stretch down, it'll stretch towards the feet. If we stretch to the sides, it will like grow to the sides and not go to the left or right. Okay, that should fix that problem. Let's try it again. And there we go. It looks better now. And I'm going to move the player down to make up for that origin change. Alright, we're going to go back to the player. The next thing I like to talk about is how to adjust for collisions, because right now we walk straight through walls whenever we have collisions. Right now, when we hit right, we just move right without even thinking. You know, we check if it's hitting right, then move right without thinking. What a smarter player would do is it would have like some more thought involved when it moves right. So whenever it tries to go right, it not only checks that there's the desire to go right, it also checks that there's the means to go right. There's nothing in front of us that's in the way. Hopefully you have like a similar logical loop whenever you're thinking about moving in a particular direction. So the way we do this is we check if we have the desire to move right, check if keyboard check VK right, and we also need to have the means to move right. We need to have the space, and that's going to look like this. So this function checks if the place is free at x plus 4 and y. So we'll only move to this new position, we're only going to add 4 to our position if we want to move to the right and that position is available. One quick note here, place free will only check if there are solids at that location, which is why it was so important that we check the solid marker. If we had not checked solid here, then place free would not have, it would say there's nothing there even though there's one of our solid objects there. So it needs specifically be checked as solid. There's another similar function in GameMaker called place empty. This one will return false if anything is in there, solid or not. Place free will only return false if it's specifically a solid object that's not there. Okay, I'm going to add a similar thing with left, and then we can test it. Here we go, and then here it is. So now if we move to the right, it hits the wall. Move to the left, it hits the wall. Awesome. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and jump into vertical movement. So there's a couple of aspects to vertical movement. I'm going to leave some comments. So one thing that's going to be different about vertical movement is we want to maintain our speed in a separate variable. So you can think of your speed as your change in position. So for our x, our change in x was always positive 4 or negative 4. So I'm going to go to the create event and make a variable for just that. So I'm going to write our change in y, or our vertical speed, as dy. I'm going to start it off at 0. So the reason I write down dy, that's a shorthand for change in y, and d just stands for delta, which is a fancy word meaning change in. But we just write dy because it's nice and short. So dy equals 0. Now let's talk about gravity. To implement gravity, we're going to do dy plus equals. We're going to do dy plus equals 0.5. Every frame, we're going to be adding 0.5 to our dy. And remember, for the y direction, positive means downwards, negative means upwards. Let's talk a little bit more about how this works. Gravity is, in physics, gravity is downward acceleration, and acceleration is the change to your speed. So another way we could have written this is we could say ddy equals 0.5, and this, let me add ddy. So ddy means delta y, or the change in your position. And then it kind of makes sense that if this is the change in your dy, then you add it to dy. So that's why that's all it takes to implement gravity. And then at the end, once we have now that we have dy set, we can just do y plus equals dy here at the end. Then if I go into my room and if I go ahead and move the player up, we should see him falling down. And also while I'm here, I think I'm gonna go ahead and place some more solids in the room and place them over these things so I can test the jumping. And he falls straight down. Cool. Next, now we want to have it collide with the ground, and here's how you do that. So here, it's very similar to the way we did it with the horizontal movement. In this case, we're using the same place free function. We're checking the place we're about to move to, which is depending on whatever our dy speed is. And we're saying if that spot is not free, we're going to stop moving. So that should work for the most part, but there are some issues with it that we'll get into a little bit later. But I'll get into that when we get there. I'll also go ahead and implement jumping while we're here. So this again is similar to how we did it horizontally. We're going to be checking for pressing up, but one of the differences here is that we're using check pressed instead of keyboard check. So check pressed is only true at the instant that you press up, whereas keyboard check will keep being true while you're holding it. So here we're saying that at the instant now you press up, decrease your speed by -10. So that will give us like a little spike upwards with our vertical speed. Okay, let's try that out. All right, so we can jump, and I can jump on these platforms, and it looks pretty good overall, but then when I jump off this platform, you'll notice a little issue. There, you saw that? It's like a little bit of a padding effect towards the bottom. So I can try it again. Yeah, so you see it has a weird padding effect. It's a little bit tricky to explain exactly what's happening there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the game again in debug mode so I can show you frame by frame exactly what's happening. Alright, I'm in debug mode. So if I jump right here, I'm going to go into frame by frame mode. And I'm going to move this pointer here to over there. And now I can jump through frame by frame. So you can see it's moving down because it's falling down. And if I go look at the variables, let me find the tab, we can see the dy here, and we can see how that changes as we move down. So you see gravity increasing that variable right there every time. And you can visually see the player moving faster and faster on every frame. So we're going to keep going like that until we get to about there, where on the next frame, we want it to sit on the ground because it's going fast enough to where it should hit the ground. But as we'll see when I go to the next frame, that's not going to happen. Okay, so note that the dy is currently at 12, but if I hit play, player stays in the same spot, dy is 0, which is exactly what we told it to. If I go down to this logic, it says if you're going to hit the ground on the next frame, set dy to 0. And then what ends up happening here is now, since our dy is much smaller, there is space for us to go to the ground. So if I go by frame, you see it's now slowly going to the ground again until it hits the ground. Okay, so the change we want to make here in order to fix that problem is over here, when we check our collision, we want to actually move straight to the ground when this check has been met. We don't want to just stay where we are with dy equals 0. We want to move straight to the ground. Alright, so let's do that next. And also, by the way, if you are interested in learning more about the debugger, let me know and I can make a tutorial about it. Alright, so to do that behavior where we want to move straight to the ground, the way you do that is with a function called moveContactSolid. And then this will keep moving until you hit the solid. So for its arguments, you need to specify the direction and the max distance. So for the direction, we're saying 270. It uses an angle between 0 and 360. In GameMaker, 0 is to the right, and as you move counterclockwise, the number gets bigger. So that puts us at 270 for going straight down. And then the next parameter is the maximum distance, which is our dy. And since it needs a positive number, I'm being a little bit extra safe and adding this absolute value here. So that way, if it's negative, absolute value will turn it into a positive. A little extra tidbit we need to keep in mind here is that we need to apply the same logic whether we're hitting the ground or whether we're hitting something above us. So if we're jumping and we hit something above us, we also want to be able to have the same logic in place. So to do that, I'm gonna add an if statement and do two moveContactSolid checks. All right. So dy less than 0 means our dy is negative, and that means we're going up. So we need to use 90 for the upward angle, and that's how that works. Now let's hit play again and see if our issue is fixed. All right. Excellent. You have made a platformer. Congratulations. That issue is fixed, and everything's working. We have perfect collisions. Everything's great. Hi, it's me again from the future, and I'm currently editing, and I wanted to amend that previous statement. Everything is not currently working perfectly because you can actually jump in the air. So maybe you want to add double jump or something, but I feel like for the basic one, you should probably hold the requirement that you can only jump when you're on the ground. So I'm going to go and show you how to make it sure you can only jump when you are on the ground, because right now you can jump wherever, whenever you want. So if I pull up the project again, I'm in OPlayer. We need to adjust this if statement, because if you remember up here with the moving left and right, we checked if we had the desire to do the thing, and then whether we also had the means to do the thing. So now we're checking if we have the desire to jump, and we're just stopping there and jumping. But we also want to check if we have the means to jump. We need to check that there is a will and a way. So I'm going to do that by adding another segment to this if statement. And here's how that looks like. We have our will to move up, and we have the way, which is to have something below us to push off of. So this is interestingly kind of the opposite of the previous one, in the sense that here we're checking there's no solids, that we have space, whereas here we're checking that there's something under us to push off of. So we rather want to check that we do not have space. So we're saying if there's not place free, x, y plus 1. So this would be the position directly below us. So we're checking that the position directly below us is not empty. Okay, let's try this again and see if that fixes the issue. Great. Let's move on to the rest of the video then. So this could be the end of the tutorial, but I wanted to go into some pro tips towards the end of the video. So I've been working with GameMaker a long time. I've made platformer tutorials before, but the last time I made a platformer tutorial was 8 years ago. And since then, there's been a lot of little tricks I've learned. So I figured I should share that wisdom. So some of this might not be applicable for all of you, but just go ahead and listen in and pick and choose whichever tips you want to use, which ones seem useful to you. And I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I decided to move the pro tips over to a separate video, so if you want to watch that, check out the link in the description. I also wanted to mention that this video is part of a series of videos where I make a castle-themed game that features a lot of various platforming concepts. So there's video on the screen now of the final product, so if anything on that demo looks interesting to you, there's a tutorial to back that up. One of those tutorials that might be particularly interesting to you is how to do a Goomba jump effect, where you can jump on an enemy and the enemy dies and you kind of pop back up. So that's all I wanted to say. Check out the ProTips video, check out the Castle Game playlist, links in the description. I hope to see you there.